With 2 months to go for the general elections, the Indian government today presented its last budget. Finance Minister Piyush Goyal, or Acting Finance Minister Piyush Goyal, provided something for everyone to cheer in this budget. Here are the major takeaways. The income tax exemption limit has been hiked from 2.5 lakh rupees or 2,50,000 rupees to 5 lakh rupees. It means that those who are earning up to 5 lakh rupees a year will not have to pay any income tax. There's more. Standard tax deduction for the salaried class has been hiked to 50,000 rupees. So it is a substantial relief for those in the lower income groups. In a major relief for farmers, the Indian government announced a direct income support for the agriculture sector, where the scheme will give 6,000 rupees to farmers with small land holdings of up to 2 hectares, and it will cost the exchequer 75,000 crore rupees. Some more good news for the agriculture sector. A 2% interest subvention will be given to those farmers who have been severely affected by natural calamities. Meanwhile, a pension scheme has been announced for the unorganized sector. An assured monthly pension of 3,000 rupees will be given to unorganized workers when they turn 60 years old. The defense budget has received a substantial hike this year. The finance minister told the parliament that more than 3 lakh crore rupees will be allocated for the defense spending, the highest ever in history.
And as per RBI, the primary reason for a spurt in individual taxpayers having taxable annual income up to rupees 5 lakhs will get full tax rebate. जो vulnerable किसान हैं, जो छोटी जमीन रखते हैं, 2 हेक्टेयर तक की जिनकी जमीन है, 2 हेक्टेयर तक की जमीन को, उन सभी को सीधा उनके इनकम में सपोर्ट, डायरेक्ट इनकम सपोर्ट 6,000 रुपए प्रति वर्ष के हिसाब से देने का निर्णय सरकार ने किया है. Our government proposes to launch a mega pension yojana, namely Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan. Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan will be for the organized sector workers with monthly income up to rupees 15,000. This pension yojana shall provide them an assured monthly pension of rupees 3,000 after they achieve the age of 60 years. पहली बार हमारा डिफेंस बजट 3 लाख करोड़ से बढ़ के 2019-20 में प्रावधान किया गया है. For securing our borders and to maintain preparedness of the highest order, if necessary, additional funds will also be provided. Reason for a spurt in non-performing loans and stressed assets. 2019-20 के लिए भारत सरकार के अनुमानित वितरण प्रस्तुत करने के लिए I can proudly say restored the image of the country. इस सरकार की
And now joining us here in our studios is Mr. Richard Rosso, US India Policy Studies expert, and we also have many others joining us. We have Sharmila Wayland joining us live from London. I'm going to quickly take this to Richard and then come to all the others joining us here. It's a special broadcast. Richard, I'm going to ask you one simple thing to start with. On a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, you can pick. How much would you rate this budget?
Well, I'd look at it more from the foreign investor, foreign company perspective, where I come from.
From that perspective
alone, you know, I probably rated about a 3. There wasn't that much in there that really kind of either burned companies, nor I think makes foreign companies excited. So it didn't hurt, didn't harm. I think by and large, foreign portfolio investors, they care about the fiscal situation. But overall, you know, everybody's going to be fine and okay. So not going to impact foreign investment flows or foreign trade flows, I don't think, in any big way.
All right, let's then look inwards. We have Mr. Chandramohan Vasudev, former Finance Secretary, joining us as well. How would you rate this, sir, in terms of the budget? You know, you've seen many a budget. It's an interim budget that's chosen to go away from conventions, as many would call it. But what is your rating of this budget?
Well, you know, there are two aspects to it. One, of course, is it's an election year budget, so it is very high on the election
rhetoric, so to speak.
There's a lot of populist type of announcements and schemes. So if you were to score it on a political sort of a scorecard, then obviously it will get a very high scorecard. But the problem, I think, in our system is that, of course, in democracy, politics has to drive economics. But there has to be a little balance. You know, the economics also must sometimes drive politics.
You think that hasn't happened with this interim budget?
Well, not in this one, frankly. But overall, I think in the previous budgets, there was a lot of economics which was driving politics. So maybe government took a lot of hard decisions in the first 2, 3, 4 years, and for which it had paid a lot of political price for those tough decisions, whether it was GST or whether demonetization or bankruptcy code and various other things that they did. So it was hit hard in a political sense. So this was a time for it to be a little more populist. I think one can't grudge government if it is doing that in this last year, because it has taken tough decisions in the last 3, 4 years. So, but on the other hand, I think even in the short run for the economy, this type of a consumption boost, it is going to put so much money in the hands of the farming community in rural areas and middle class players with tax exemption up to 5 lakhs and all that. So that should increase consumption. That should be good news for the businesses, because they will be spending a lot on consumer goods and things of that type. So short run economic gains are also there. But unfortunately, the long term gains which will come only from investment, they will probably have a pause for some time. So the investment-led growth will suffer for some time, but consumption-led growth probably will get a boost.
An important point that you make, Mr. Chandramohan Vasudev. Chandramohan Vasudev, former Finance Secretary, joining us here. We're also being joined by Mr. Richard Rosso. We're also being joined by Sharmila Whelan, live from London. Sharmila, if you can hear me right, you know, there is lots of talk about the way these schemes have been announced and whether India is fiscally prudent because fiscal deficit is growing to 3.4%. And more importantly, growth, is the growth coming with the generation of jobs or not? But this budget seems to have sidestepped many of those questions to deliver something that many can be happy about still.
This is a good budget. Indian public finances remain in good shape. I mean, it was a given that we're going to get fiscal slippage in the current fiscal year, but the fiscal slippage has been contained. The budget deficit is for the current fiscal year forecast to come in at 3.4 against an initial forecast of 3.3, small slippage, and it's still down on 3.5 the previous fiscal year. You look at the budget 2019 fiscal year. Of course, there's going to be populist spending. It's an election year. The Modi government didn't do particularly well in the state elections last year. So, of course, there's going to be spending to try and win over voters. But spending is not exploding. Quite the contrary. If you look at total government spending this year, it's rising, despite all the measures that have been announced, it's rising at a much slower pace than it did in the current fiscal year. Again, you look at revenue projections. Revenue projections are very sensible. In fiscal 2018, revenues rose by 20%. In the coming fiscal year, in the budget, the revenues are forecast to rise by 14%. The government is allowing for the fact that nominal GDP growth is going to slow, mostly because, or not entirely because inflation is going to stay low and contained. So to me, okay, there's a lot of spending measures, but the numbers add up, and therefore the target of 3.4% is highly achievable.
Richard Rosso, if I were to take that across to you, would you concur with that? The fact that there is some bullish predictions for the Indian economy, and this budget could yet help us achieve that elusive 8% growth?
Well, not elusive, because, of course, the numbers came out saying that in the last quarter, actually, India grew by potentially over 8%. But
we're talking about the overall year numbers, which has been revised now to 7.2%. That's how much India is expected to grow for the year 2018-19, and this is for the next year.
And that's a concern that, I think the world has, which is, you talk about 3.4%, which is based on a certain percent of economic growth.
You mean the fiscal deficit?
Yeah, but based on, is the economy going to be able to grow? Is the tax base going to be able to grow commensurate with that? And the numbers, 8.2%, you don't see a lot of companies coming back and saying that they really feel that the economy is growing quite that fast. So if they're basing the number on growth rates that maybe they may not be able to meet, that's going to be a tricky situation. And this is an interim. There will be another budget that will be released after the election there. So if BJP comes back, Congress comes in, something else happens, they're not going to roll these things back. If anything, they'll announce new programs. So the story's not quite done yet in terms of what the next fiscal looks like.
Mr. Chandramohan Vasudev, if I can ask you to comment on that, you're looking at a uncertainty in terms of the government formation, but many would concur and say that there is no uncertainty. We all know what's going to happen when it comes to the next elections. But there's uncertainty being built up because of what happened with the state elections recently. And in that context, this budget and what Richard was talking about, if a new government comes in, then these things get rolled back. All of this puts India in a very precarious position. And this is a rather ambitious interim budget, being the point.
Well, the type of these populist type of decisions, whether it is direct income transfer to the farmers or the 3,000 rupees pension for the unorganized sector worker or the 5 lakh tax exemption limit for the middle class, these can't be rolled back by any government, whether it's this government or the next government. So these are there to stay. Now, of course, the fiscal implication of that, those numbers have yet to be sort of seen more clearly, because, of course, the finance minister has said that the fiscal impact will be contained. But then the fine print of these numbers has to be seen. One can't have such large payouts from the exchequer without having a fiscal implication.
Right.
But that much also is true that, the direct tax revenues have shown a lot of buoyancy.
Yeah.
So because of the new taxpayers which have come into the system. GST also, as it stabilizes, should increase more revenue earnings for the government, the central government and the state government. So maybe there is a little fiscal space for government to do all these things. But I think where the budget is going to be a little harmful in the medium term is that the investment rate, which has already come down to 32-33% of GDP, which used to be 40%. So we won't have investment-led growth in the short term. Of course, consumption-led growth is a good thing. But putting all your sort of savings through taxes and all into consumption items like these is going to put a big sort of a
very
problem for investment.
Very valid point you make, Richard.
So, I don't know.
Isn't that it?
That is a medium-term problem.
India is known for its consumption story, India being a consumption-led economy, but which in the long term will give the Indian economy and Indian households a lot to think about. We will revisit that thought, but for now, I'm going to shift focus to the headlining problem of this budget, which was the distress of the farmers, which has seen the ruling party lose an election after election across 3 North Indian states. Let's first listen in to what Prime Minister Modi had to say on the way the budget has dealt with farmer distress, and then we'll continue talking.
इस बजट में 12 करोड़ से ज्यादा किसानों को 3 करोड़ से ज्यादा मध्यम वर्ग के टैक्स पेयर परिवारों को और 30-40 करोड़ श्रमिकों को सीधा लाभ मिलना तय हुआ है.
So, obviously, good economic sense means, and I'm putting this question to all of you, Sharmila Whelan, and we have Richard Rosso and Chandramohan Vasudev over here, is that good economic sense says that farm loans don't really solve the agriculture distress problem, because first of all, the loans don't reach to all farmers. The farm loan waivers so far that have been given out by so many states, 1.9 lakh crore rupees to be precise since April, it reaches about 30% of the farming population. So farm loan waivers are out of the question. That's why this government, in this interim budget, it's an interesting move to give the 6,000 rupee cash transfer. Now, I want you to tell us, what do you think about a move like that? Because that is something that the government had to do. They had to address the rural distress as part of this budget. And that is the reason why you have a scheme like this with a huge outlay. But do you think this is the silver bullet that can solve farmers' distress?
If anybody in India figured out what the silver bullet is, you wouldn't have state elections flipping every single time. You wouldn't have so much turmoil.
Maybe I overestimated my question. If I were to ask you, do you think this is the best possible thing that a government can do in a budget, considering you have a situation that is a powder keg of a situation? You have farmer distress across the country in every state. Well,
I look back and frankly, I think the Modi government, you remember this is still the party of Vajpayee, and I think you look at Vajpayee's re-election in 2004. They went to the nation and talked about urban development, the cities, the beautiful cities, and all these tech jobs and everything, and it didn't sell with voters. So I do think the Modi government has learned a lot by seeing the Vajpayee regime. Vajpayee reformed all throughout his tenure. And a lot of those reforms triggered growth that was only witnessed after UPA came in. So Modi, most of the big reforms he did were in the first or second year of office. And then this idea about re-election campaign, focus on rural instead of the urban. So I do see that a lot of lessons learned by the last BJP government. Will it end up differently? We'll see in a couple of months.
All right, I'm going to take this across Sharmila Whelan before I bring it back to Mr. Chandramohan Vasudev. Sharmila Whelan, Mr. Chandramohan Vasudev and many others are talking to us about the kind of balance that a good budget needs to achieve, especially for a country like India. Do you think this interim budget, a rather ambitious one at that, managed to pull off this tightrope walk of being balanced, be it in terms of fiscal prudence, at the same time giving enough for the economy?
I think you're asking two separate questions within that. Is it fiscally prudent? Yes, the numbers stack up. The government has been, in its forecasts, have been sensible about their projections of what growth is going to be. On the back of that, what are the tax revenue collections going to be? The fact that GST has been rolled out now, so you're not getting a huge, like in the current year, 45% rise in GST. They're looking at a more muted increase in GST. So they've been sensible in this. So is it fiscally prudent in terms of the numbers? I mean, yes. Is it achievable? Yes. But your second question is, could it have been a more balanced budget? Yeah, sure. Of course, we'd like to have seen a more balanced budget, right? The main thrust of the budget on the tax side is relief for the personal sector, for the household sector. We would rather have seen more relief and tax cuts for the corporate sector. As the former finance minister said, the corporate sector, especially the private investment side, is still weak. It's picking up, but it could do with a boost from the government side in terms of lower taxes. But I think this government right now, this year, doesn't have a choice but to address farmer distress, show some largesse to the household and rural economy. And I think, we've gone through demonetization, GST, it's been hugely disruptive, and it's not a bad thing, as long as this does not become the norm for budgets going forward.
If I want to just come in and ask you a follow-up question before you get on with it, I also want to ask you, do you think this entire 6,000 rupee per annum idea is a good idea when it comes to dealing with farmer distress, way better than probably a farm loan waiver?
I think which one is better, I think you got to see which one's going to be actually effective. I think for me,
do you think this one has a better chance of being more effective?
Yes, because it's a direct payment is the main thing. It's a direct payment. And I think the problem with a farm loan waiver is it creates a moral hazard problem, right? While with a direct transfer, first of all, there's no middleman. It goes to the farmer, and it is his decision what he's going to do with it. The debt does not go down. So it's his decision whether I pay down debt or use it on consumption, to spend and buy a house or buy, whatever, discretionary spending. And I think you're putting the choice back in the farmer's hand and not creating a moral hazard problem by just forgiving debt. And, the farmer goes out and borrows again.
Fair enough. All right. Chandramohan Vasudev, if I can ask you to comment on that. You've been listening patiently to what Sharmila Whelan was saying. If you can comment on and tell us, because there is many ways of fixing farmer distress. There is the minimum support price. Is one way of fixing farmer distress. There is the farm loan waiver, and there is the cash transfer option, and there is what this new yojana that the government has come out with. So, in your eyes, you've seen many a thing being done by governments and budgets. How would you rate this one?
Farmer distress today is for real. There's no question of that. But, there is a long-term and a short-term sort of problem and a long-term, short-term solution to it. Why is this distress today? The fundamental, I think, problem is that today we've got almost 60% of the population which is dependent on agriculture. And agriculture is now contributing hardly 15 to 16% to the GDP. So you've got the situation of 60% of the population dependent on a sector which is contributing only 15 to 16% to the GDP.
But it does contribute a huge electorate. And we have elections in a couple of months.
I'm talking about economics. So this type of situation is not sustainable. Yeah. So in the long run, of course, there have to be means which government has various programs in place to wean away more and more people from dependence on agriculture. Non-farm activities, whether it is horticulture, or whether it is poultry, or whether it is fisheries or other non-farm activities, and also a little bit of education, skill development, providing other type of jobs, agro-processing. So these are sort of happening that it will take effect in the medium term. But what do you do in the short term? Because distress is for real. Because no amount of income support, no amount of loan waivers, no amount of interest subvention can solve the distress, because 60% people are dependent on 15% of GDP. So in the short term, you have to give these type of things. But basically, farming, which has so many people dependent on it, is not viable, especially for the small land holding. So if the farming is not viable, then this one way to shore up that viability is to give them direct income support of 6,000, 8,000 or whatever.
So hopefully
that is one way to shore up the viability.
By the time the full budget is presented, there are more concrete ways in which you can increase the contribution of agriculture to the GDP of the country.
Short-term, medium-term, both.
Yes.
And I think government in the past has put in place medium-term measures which are bearing fruit.
All right.
Of course, the numbers have come down. It used to be 75%. Now it is 60%, and some numbers also say it is even less than 60% dependence on agriculture.
Right.
But if you see the most developed countries or other developed economies, there the dependence of agriculture is hardly 4% population, 6% population, even though it may be contributing a larger share to the GDP. So here we've got a very big sort of imbalance, and this is not sustainable in the medium term.
All right.